Well, hello everyone and good evening. I hope that you are all keeping well. I'll try and keep this a little bit shorter because I feel that we've actually covered quite a lot of ground and I'm also quite tired after finishing work. Now, firstly, my normal disclaimer. I'm tackling this as a historian. This is my personal opinion. It's not my professional opinion. I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone or any particular institution. These are my thoughts based on my years of studying war at university and a lifelong interest in war. This is designed to help you understand the theory of war studies. It is not designed to be a political comment or to cause offence to anyone. As a historian, the role of a historian and someone with historical training is to remain impartial. So I apologise in advance if I'm not flag waving for a particular nation or state. History has a nasty habit of repeating itself. History also has a very nasty habit of unearthing documents and materials which aren't available in the present but come out 50 or 100 years later based on declassification or accounts which are found via archaeology or testimony which weren't available at the time. So no historian will stake their colours to the mast. We will remain objective because we know that as historians, our views of what's happening now may be quite different in 50 years' time. So welcome to War Studies 101. We are looking today at jus ad bellum, or why and when you can go to war. This is called the just cause theory, and this is part 2B of studying the laws of war. Again, this is a conceptual study. This is theoretical. If you are expecting me to pass judgment on a political outcome or a political group, then I'm sorry, you'll be disappointed. If you do have any questions or queries around that, please rewatch the start of the video. So, the first thing we need to look at is that actually, in terms of who can and can't declare war, the international framework is state-centric. So if you are a terrorist watching this video, then I'm afraid you're going to be disappointed. The state in international relations has the legal right to and a monopoly of force within that state. States are internationally recognised as legal actors, and they are recognised and participants in the United Nations. Now, at some point, states may not be recognised, and states may be in a disputed state. However, the just cause and the rights to declare war and when to declare war is really in the international community very much centred around the state. So, for example, non-state actors, and we'll look at a couple of them. So we'll look at the BRICS and we'll look at the EU. Unfortunately, the BRICS and the EU do not have a power to declare war. So the EU itself can't declare war. However, states within BRICS and states within the EU, they can declare war because they are states. The United Nations Security Council can also make a legally binding decision and can declare war. And that's one of the few non-state actors or non-state bodies that actually have that right. So I'm very sorry if you are wanting to declare war and you are not a state. Unfortunately, it is not a legal right that is accorded to you. We'll come on to actors who are resisting invasions later. They do have certain rights to be involved as combatants in a war, but I'll be looking at that in part 2C, which is the rules for the conduct of war. So at this stage, we're looking at what's called just cause theory. So we'll come on to resistance movements and we'll come on to militias, but we'll do that in the next series. So please hold that for now. So let's have a look. Can anyone create a state? Firstly, yes, and secondly, no. So if I wanted to create the state of D-Train, I could go out in my car and I could find some recruits who wanted to be in the D-Train state. Unfortunately, when I took up arms and then I decided to collect tax, I would be breaking the UK laws. The UK government would very quickly clamp down on me. My state would not be internationally recognised. It wouldn't even be recognised in the United Kingdom. What would happen is I would likely end up in jail. So, yes, technically you can create a state, but actually in practice, the existing states have a monopoly over the use of force. So if someone tries to create a state like the Free State of Jones, I recommend watching that film if you want to understand more about the American Civil War. Unfortunately, when you try and create your own state, you quickly find that you do not have the monopoly of the use of force, and the states that do exist will very quickly stamp your state out. You probably won't get international recognition, and even if you get international recognition, you won't get what's called normalization of relations. Now, the best example of when a state has been created is 1948 and the creation of the State of Israel. Israel at that period was created in part because of what had happened during the Holocaust in World War II. The Jewish people had been pretty much obliterated by the Holocaust. They needed somewhere to go. At that time, you had what was called Palestine. Now, I won't get political about what happened. I will just say that the State of Israel was created via war, and it was created via wars in 1948 and 1956 and 1967. The Arab states tried to obliterate the State of Israel and failed. Now, for many years, the State of Israel, whilst it existed, was not recognised, certainly not by the Arab states. After a lengthy period of time, various Arab states started to recognise the State of Israel. Now, states like Britain, states like France, states like America recognised the State of Israel a lot earlier. The Arab states, many of them took a lot later, and that only happened after the 1973 wars and the 1982 wars. There are some states that still do not recognise the existence of Israel, but the majority of states do. So Israel as a state, it was formed. It then became recognised internationally, and other states have normalised relations with Israel. The reason there is a war at the moment is really to do with the normalisation between Saudi Arabia. Again, I'm not going to get political, but a state will go through various phases of creation, recognition, and normalisation. Now, within Israel, the Israeli state has a monopoly of force. It has been able to recruit, it has been able to arm, it has been able to tax, and it has been able to form that state. And various states are now on the verge of recognising it. Although whether that happens now because of the actions of Hamas is debatable. But just to show you that states can be created, they can be created via war, they can be recognised, and they can become real entities within the United Nations, where Israel does have a seat at the United Nations. So let's look at history, and let's look at just war theory in history. So if we think right back to what we call antiquity, we're looking here at the Roman times and beyond, back to biblical times, and even further back, all the way back to when the cavemen decided, or cave women, decided that they were going to form tribes and they were going to war with other tribes. There has always been some form of societal Probably spelt that wrong. Spelling is not my strong point, but there has always been some form of societal norm about when it was okay to declare war and when it was not okay. Now, the problem that we have in antiquity is we have very few sources available. The sources that we have available tend to concentrate more on what happened in those wars rather than why it happened. And when they do give us an idea of why it happened, it tends to be very much focused on what the victor perceived the injustice to be. So if we take, for example, Trajan's column, if we take, for example, the Babylonian friezes, they will tell us a lot about what happened during the war. They will glorify Caesar in subduing a population or a tribe and taking the prizes from that war, but they won't necessarily tell us why that war happened and what the reasoning behind it was, what the debates and outcome of the Roman Senate were, and whether that was regarded as being just at the time. Now, we do know something about what happened in antiquity, and we know that from books and records which have been passed down, like Homer's Iliad. So even in history, we can determine that even in Rome, where we had the Caesar making decisions, we had the Roman Senate made up of nobles and generals, and then we had religion. And now these all played a massive part in when the Romans could and couldn't declare war. So, for example, within the Roman system, it was sometimes regarded as okay by the Senate for the Caesar to declare war, and other times it was regarded as not okay. Now, of course, this was a time of intrigues and people actually stabbing each other. Now, if you want to watch something about Rome, which gives you a sense of the intrigues and the treachery, you can watch HBO's Rome series, although you won't actually learn a lot about Roman history, other than it will give you a sense of the fact that people literally were stabbing each other and taking power. So you have the generals. Now, the generals also ended up fighting each other. Mark Antony, Roman armies fighting Roman armies fighting Hannibal. But essentially what you often find was they classed war as being about the barbarians versus civilization. They were taking land, they were oppressing tribes, they were securing natural resources, and they were fighting over religion. But we don't know a huge amount about what was regarded as just and what wasn't, because the source material isn't there. Or when it is there, it's very biased. So many of the Roman writers, such as Pliny, going back to the Greek writers, they tended to present things with their own bias. Now, in terms of war studies itself, we have a very Western-centric and very Western-biased view of war. We tend to exclude what was happening in the Arabic and the Chinese cultures at the time, also Inca culture. Now, Inca culture is very interesting, South American culture, because you have wars to enslave people for human sacrifice. So our understanding and our legal system is very much based on the antiquity that we have from the ancient Greeks and from the Romans. One of the best sources that we have on war is actually the Bible as a historical record. And what you will find is there is a real connection there between just cause and religion. So, for example, as a historical text, the Israelites believed that at various times God told them to go and wipe out another people. So you have wars between the Israelites and the Canaanites, between the Israelites and the Hittites. Essentially, they're wars over land, resources, and control of political systems. But there is a strong connection, and there was in the Roman world, between religion and just cause. The same thing was true within the Arabic world, and going back before that in antiquity to the Babylonian world, to the Persian kingdoms. You have a lot of connection between when it is right to go to war and when it is wrong, and that determination is often made on religious grounds. So, for example, when a Roman army went to war, they would have the soothsaying. You would have the priests, and the priests would cut open animals to determine what the omens were and whether the omens were good or bad. And if you had bad omens, then often people felt that the campaign was doomed to failure. So religion plays a massive part in the societal norms in antiquity, which says whether it is okay or not okay to go to war. And in the medieval period, this became even stronger. So in the medieval period, we start to see the development of the rules of war and when it is okay to go to war. Now, the key driver in the West was the church. And this was, of course, the Pope. So if you were a king and you had a fallout with your rival, you wanted the Pope to rule in your favour. And if the Pope, via his bishops and via his letters, said that your cause was just, then you were taken to have just cause. Now, that might be that one of your rivals is a Protestant kingdom. The Pope has given you permission to attack that kingdom. You have just cause. It might be a dispute between two barons. The Pope, the Catholic Church, has given you permission because your cause is right, and you are going to settle the affair in battle. And in battle, God will judge whether your cause is right or wrong, but you've got the permission to engage in war or engage in battle because the Pope or the Catholic Church has given you that permission. So what we actually have is a very rules-based order. We have situations and establishments of when it is okay to go to war, and those judgments are made religiously, and the final arbiter is on the field of battle where God decides the winner. The problem is if you have been given that authority by the Pope and God decides that you've lost the battle, but you've still survived and your kingdom is still surviving, well, maybe God is just testing you. Maybe he wants to see how deep your faith is. So you go back to war, you fight another battle for God to arbitrate and give you the decision. So what you tend to happen here is you have wars which last for a long time, like the 100 Years' War. You have other campaigns which again last for a huge amount of time because people don't necessarily accept the judgment of God because maybe they had done some sin. Maybe there was something wrong or they hadn't paid enough to the church. So you tend to have situations where unless a kingdom is completely defeated because they feel that they have just cause, they keep going. Now, it's very difficult to say what was happening in the Arab world and the Chinese world because a lot of the source material does and doesn't exist. But essentially in this period, you have a clash. You have a clash between the Christian, use that term in inverted commas, the Christian Catholic system, which gives just cause for Christians to go on pilgrimage and to take land back from the invaders, and you have a clash of religions. So you've got a clash here between the Christian religion and the Islamic faith. You've got a cultural clash. Now the Pope says, yes, it's okay for you to go on crusade. They issue articles to start the crusade, which gives what they think is a just cause. They then go and fight, and then they fight, say, Saracen. And again, these wars last over a long period of time, because even if they are defeated, they believe, I'm being tested, I need to go back and raise a new army to fight the Islamic world. Now, underneath all of this religion, there is a political desire to take land. But in terms of justification and who gives the permission for the war, it is connected to religion. As things develop, we get into a period of nationalism and revolution. And certainly the biggest player here is revolutionary France. Now, the wars of religion have been settled with what's called the 1648 treaties, the treaties of Westphalia and other treaties. And they essentially give a state rights over religion and politics within that state. The revolutionary period in France turns that all on its head. And what you start to have there is you start to have revolutionary ideals which start to spread war in connection with nationalism or overthrowing political systems. So the causes of war then change again, but there is still a strong connection between religion and politics. The revolutionary period is somewhat of a historical aberration, although nationalism survives. So nationalism, the idea that you are French, that you are British, that you represent France, that you are fighting for France, that you are fighting a campaign of revolution to spread the ideals of legality, eternity, and fraternity. Those really come to the fore in that period. And what happens is very much at this period, you have what's called a victor's peace, or the victor, whoever wins, gets to dictate the peace. So this is done by treaties. So if there is an inconclusive war, you will likely get a fair and balanced treaty. If there is a very decisive war, you will get a victor's peace, which is not fair. Now, this can lead to the destruction of your opponent's political system, or it can impose financial costs or land costs. The best example of this is the Treaty of Versailles, which ends World War I. And that is where huge reparations are demanded from the German state. Post-World War I, there's some attempt to regulate and apply the laws of who can and can't go to war and when they can. And this is done by what's called the League of Nations. Now, the League of Nations collapses. It collapses in the face of Nazi aggression. It collapses in the face of a Japanese aggression in Manchuria. And it collapses because people are able to go in and out of the League of Nations. If they don't accept the decision of the League of Nations, well, there is no enforcement. And that results in World War II. Grievances from the victor's peace are used by various regimes to rearm and to start World War II. So after World War II, there is then a real attempt to impose some form of legal structure on when states can and can't go to war. And this is pretty much decided by the Nuremberg trials, where you have the Nazi rulers on trial and there is a legal outcome for what they have done. And this is where the concept of just war comes in. So the concept of jus ad bellum, or when you can and can't go to war, is actually a post-World War II framework. It looks very old because it's in Latin, but you have to remember that's because of the legal system. And this determines that there is such a thing as a crime of aggression. It puts in place laws for when you can and can't go to war. It gives a framework. And the main framework that you have to understand it creates is it creates a legal right of self-defense, which is your just cause. So a state can act in self-defense to prevent it from being invaded or disarmed and forced to do its political opponent's will. This is just cause theory. The other part of the framework is that the United Nations Security Council has a right to make a judgment and declare war. So the UN Security Council can decide that it is right and proper to declare war, to come to somebody else's defence, and when there is a just cause, and we'll come on to that more, but there are rights under the Genocide Convention regarding the prevention of genocide and what has become and expanded now to human rights law and interventions. But this needs to be done by the UN Security Council, and ultimately states can be tried to determine whether they have committed the crime of aggression. Post 2018, the crime of aggression is allowed to be heard in the International Criminal Court. And there is the International Court of Justice, and there is currently a case going on where Ukraine has taken Russia to the International Court of Justice because of a complaint that Russia has abused the Genocide Convention to justify its actions in the Donbass. Now, let's look at a case study of just war. And one of the biggest case studies and one of the most important revolves around Iraq in 2003. And this is a real test of the concept of self-defense. Now, I am not going to make a determination because it is not my place. I will throw this out there and I will say, okay, well, the right of self-defense means that there has to be a threat. And that threat was taken to be that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction and that he was going to use those weapons of mass destruction. Now, this is where lawyers come in, and most of the politicians involved in making those decisions had lawyers and were lawyers. So you would say, well, okay, was the threat of weapons of mass destruction? Well, we know that Saddam didn't have them in 2003. They couldn't find any. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the war was wrong. Because if, and it won't happen, but if one of the people that made the decision for that war went to court and faced justice for it, they would throw the intelligence that they had. And they would say, my intelligence told me that Saddam was going to use weapons of mass destruction and he presented a threat. Now, the problem here is many of the documents will not be declassified for another 100 years. The second thing is that unless someone can throw some form of a spanner in that defence, it is very hard to say that a leader has acted illegally if the intelligence that they are presented with tells them what that threat is and they have to act on it. The other thing that has happened is we live now in a weakened security world. The security apparatus that has kept us safe, the United Nations Security Council, is divided. So it's very easy for the United Nations Security Council to make decisions on what isn't and isn't a legal right of when a state has gone to war. The difficulty is that when the decision or the determination actually involves states with a veto power, the permanent Security Council members, is there is no way of making that decision. America, Britain, France, permanent Security Council members state that Russia has committed a crime of aggression in invading Ukraine. China abstains. Russia vetoes it. They can't determine legally whether that is or isn't illegal. Even if the International Criminal Court determines that Russia has committed the crime of aggression, the enforcement of that decision has to be made by the United Nations Security Council. So again, we're in the same position. If the International Criminal Court determines that Russia has committed the crime of aggression, Russia will veto it. And it's a permanent member. It has veto. So you either change the whole system and scrap it, which then totally weakens the international security apparatus, blowing it apart, and you're back in the situation of the League of Nations. Or states get involved in the business of other states to settle matters themselves. And this is where your precedents come in. So your precedents come in from cases like Rwanda, where you have genocide. They come in from cases like the wars in the former Yugoslavia, where you have the involvement to prevent crimes against humanity. Now, these involvements are meant to be determined by the United Nations Security Council, and they're always stronger when that happens. So, for example, the case in the first Gulf War of 1990 and 1991 was stronger because there was a UN Security Council decision. States like Britain and America, France, and the EU states recognise that because of the permanent veto, and they will not get rid of the permanent veto because it is handy to have a permanent veto, they recognise that actually the UN Security Council cannot make decisions. So then you see an involvement in war, which is not for protecting your country, but protecting the rights of other countries to self-defence. And that's where you end up in a situation where countries like America, Britain, France and Germany will supply and support the right of Ukraine to self-defence against Russian aggression outside of the UN Security Council. Now, whether that is right or wrong is not for me to say, because I am not the United Nations Security Council and I am not the International Criminal Court, and we need to await their judgments. We need to await their judgments. And as a historian, at the minute, we do not have all the facts. So I hope that is a good explanation for you of when you can and can't go to war. I will let you think of some examples. Again, I will be disabling comments on this video, and the reason I have to disable comments is because, unfortunately, whereas I'm trying to be objective and trying to present the theory of war and what has happened historically, there are some people who are not objective and they make no attempt to be, and they would just put hatred against another people or population or government, and I don't want that on my channel. So I hope that explains some of the theory and why I restrict comments on these videos. Have a good evening and take care.